Networking Managers Summit and the, let's say, one of the early morning lectures which deal with Google Analytics and what we aim to do once we have a project running, and basically once we have this kind of a responsibility to track all of our efforts in terms of making sure that the efficiency of all of the projects and everything else makes any kind of sense. All in all, Google Analytics is a tool that we usually, let's say, take for granted, meaning that most of your probably projects have this kind of a tool implemented, but the point is you can always do better. Essentially, this tool allows you to track efficiency, be more meaningful in any kind of an effort that you do in terms of digital marketing and any kind of digital project performance tracking. Google Analytics is especially valuable since it's highly liked by the community, meaning that most of the, let's say, people who do any kind of a work with digital analytics rely on Google Analytics to be one of the, let's say, best and foremost tools which tell the whole truth of what's happening with the site and with the overall performance of your digital marketing budgets. So for the early morning lecture, we're going to go through some basics in terms of what Google Analytics is, what can we do with it, and let's say mainly some of the items that you need to take account if you want to, let's say, learn more and make more sense of the data that you collected about your projects. So to start with, just a little introduction. My name is Zorin and I work in the company called Escape. We are based in Croatia and we manage a lot of markets in a lot of industries. We are quite an old agency, basically. We work for, let's say, about 15 years. In Google Ads and Google Analytics, we are there for, let's say, about 8 to 10 years, which is a lot in terms of digital marketing and any kind of digital performance that you do. Because things change, analytics also change. Analytics is, let's say, not even a teenager, but it already has a lot of, let's say, versions up and running with the upcoming change, which is going to happen probably early next year with a new version of Google Analytics. So this is something that you need to be aware of. Most of the things that we do in terms of, let's say, tracking, digital advertising, we base our decisions and take quite seriously what we get from Google Analytics as a collection tool and basically as an insights generation tool. We specialize in it mainly in, aside from Google, we also specialize in Facebook. So we take care of most of the, let's say, the two biggest platforms with the highest reach in our region, in European Union, definitely. We currently employ 30 people and we manage about 7 million euros of budget. So we do a lot of work, we spend a lot of clients' money. And we learn a lot from it, and most of the clients that we work with have some success with it. Usually there were some hiccups along the way, especially now that we came to an era where we have to do these kinds of lectures online. Similar applies to any kind of a, let's say, business that is highly concentrated on the offline communication and offline product consumption, especially like in this kind of a business where you have charters and everything else, where this offline part is essential. Basically, you cannot do without it. Some of our clients, especially in travel part, are, let's say, learning to adapt to this new situation, but all in all, we basically track them all. Regardless if it's travel, if it's finance, telco, and similar, the same tool can be applied to many industries, but with some additional changes which are needed to better understand what's happening beneath it all. So the company itself is, let's say, maintained in a way that we like to be specialized in a specific service and some industries, because this allows us to be much more flexible in what we do, and what we like is to understand the tools that we use for our daily work. This especially applies in terms of similar what you do in your industry and how you understand all of the tools and businesses and relationship with the clients. We like to take this approach and connect all of the dots. So in terms of certification, Escape, let's say, follows a similar route of how a specific, let's say, person buys a specific product, meaning that we take care of the research, then the measurement part, which we cannot do work without, then the advertising part, which is the, let's say, the cost-heavy part of the entire work. And we also take care of the education part, where we like to transfer all of the knowledge and experience that we get from spending your money basically to your in-house teams. Because at some point in the client agency relationship, the client learns a lot. And then in this case, the client is ready to take over a lot of this operational work, which is also one of the goals of working with the agency. For today and for this class, we are going to work with measurement basics, and the part of which is, let's say, this some kind of a advanced reporting part. Not sure if we're going to make it all inside 1 hour, but the point is that my goal is for you to understand what analytics is, what can it do, and what's the next steps, let's say, for you, and how can you engage with Google Analytics. So for this kind of work, let's say, to be possible, before you do any kind of implementation and technical things with Google Analytics, the most important thing is to understand what's beneath it all. Meaning you need to understand what needs to be measured, what drives your business, and how you map all of these things to, let's say, your projects. It can either be a mobile app, so that's for starters, or it can be just a web page, or it can be a very complex web project, which includes the booking part, the leads part, and everything else. But all in all, the KPIs and the measurement plan is essential, because if you know what you track and why you actually track it, then it's extremely easy to do any kind of reporting and to do any kind of optimization afterwards. So the first part is to understand what Google Analytics actually does. And in this case, this is just a basic representation of what an actual purchase journey is. There are many touch points where the user is, let's say, confronted with some kind of a messaging, either from you, competition, or any kind of a, let's say, government effort like tourist boards or travel boards or something like that, which take care of destination or any kind of let's say, travel attribute for a specific destination. It can be either food, it can be, I don't know, activities or things like that. But the point is, there are many, many touch points, which some of them we can track, but some of those we cannot. This is especially to the point once we, let's say, get some kind of a, let's say, two-part categories between the media which we send the messages from. So the first part is the online, which is the easiest part, where we can track, collect, and do many, let's say, nice things with it, because we can collect all of these signals, we can manage to analyze them, and we can use all of this data to, let's say, be better at our work. And there are two ways to, let's say, do it. So the first part is just to report on it, meaning, let's say, top cities, top languages, top audiences in terms of gender or age. But in other cases, we can use all of this data to basically activate all of these users, meaning if we can recognize who the user is, we can, let's say, create a completely different experience for that particular user or a segment of users, where we can then personalize the experience and hopefully increase the conversion rates at the end. So this is the whole point of digital. Performance-based, data-based, and let's say highly flexible and highly agile, which is also one of the things that it's quite different from offline part. when we talk about TV or any kind of ATL, let's say, communications with the client. This part, the offline part, is extremely hard to track because we do not have the ability to track all of these touch points. So the point is we focus on the things that we can measure, and we try to measure it to the best of our ability, using the best tools, best people, and then using, let's say, best analysis and so on. But the point is, another point is basically that this customer journey is usually not simple. It can be a long journey, and what is usually the case is that, let's say, the higher the price, or let's say the higher the complexity of the product is, the journey is a bit longer. So when you purchase a car, you're probably not going to do it inside a day. But if you, let's say, try to purchase diapers or baby food, then you'll probably do it in a twist. So in this case, this kind of a service like you offer, basically with charters, yacht charters, speedboats, or something in these lines, could take a while for a person to, let's say, choose something specific, because the service itself is not that simple as if you buy some, I don't know, piece of clothing or something like that. Once you start, let's say, with this whole journey, investing in marketing, in your websites, in your applications, in your, let's say, videos, copy, and everything else, you start to see that not all of the people that come to the site or inside the app want to convert. When I say convert, they want to book with you. And in this case, there are many, let's say, points in this user journey where something can go wrong. Either your site doesn't work, either your site works, but the, let's say, the availability of product is a question then. So what can happen is that you, let's say, drive traffic, meaning you buy traffic basically from different sources, meaning either Google, Facebook, it can be organic, it can be paid. But once they get to the site, they are either not, let's say, hectic about the experience that they get on the site, which is, let's say, one of the reasons, speed of the site, availability of the product, ease of navigation, and so on. But then again, you can also get in a situation where you just buy the wrong type of traffic. Meaning if, let's say, you want to rent a yacht, let's say, and if you want to do it in Germany, let's say, Germany's regions are, let's say, quite different in terms of focus of where people want to rent. So you have this northern part of Germany, which is completely different than the southern part of Germany. And then when you get the Germany in whole, you could get some kind of a conversion rate. But the point is that most of the northern part could be, let's say, looking for this specific service, but for a completely different country, meaning that they want something completely different, but they use the same keyword. So this is what you need to understand. It's not only the point of knowing the funnel, but knowing what can the actual reasons for exiting this kind of a funnel be. So this purchase funnel is full of holes. And the point of analytics and using any kind of an additional tool is basically to plug all of these holes, meaning that you will probably spend less. But this is not the end goal of spending less. The goal is basically to find all of these holes, to gap all of them, and basically to increase the conversion rate of the funnel. Meaning drive better customers. Once they get to the site, drive better experience. And once they, let's say, purchase at least one time, you do this care stage where once you acquire a specific user, you try to generate sales again and again and again. Meaning that, let's say, the most popular metric for either digital marketing or any kind of a business should be client lifetime value. So this is the point of the funnel and everything else, to get this first acquisition, to get this first purchase, and after that just create a good relationship with the client where you can easily manage additional sales. So CLV, client lifetime value, is, let's say, one of the most important KPIs that you can get, but it's also highly complex to calculate. So it's not that easy. It's definitely not easy. And also the point of the CLV and everything else is not just that you drive, let's say, the highest CLV that you can, but the point is that you can recognize who the users are who drive your CLV up and how to find more of them. So this is the point of digital analytics and smart bidding and things that you are probably going to learn throughout the day in other lectures. So the KPIs, uh, I mean, I'm a business major and I hated KPIs while I was in the university because it was quite boring because most of these KPIs were not in action. You just thought of them, but you didn't have any, let's say, meaningful way to manage all of them. And one of the things for KPIs, these key performance indicators, is that you need to be able to manage them in any kind of a way. So if you have something written on the paper, but there is absolutely nothing that you can do about it, then it's not a good KPI. It's something that you need to avoid, definitely. But point is, KPIs are just plain numbers. They can be formulated, let's say, like a relative or an absolute number, but they usually explain some kind of a success, and they usually explain if you're going the right way, if your sales trends and everything else is going the right way. Is the, let's say, profit or sales in terms of some kind of an expected result. So once you know this kind of a number, once you define it, you can track it and you can manage all of the things around it in order to, let's say, optimize it, to make it better, to make your performance better. If you don't have KPIs defined, then analytics doesn't make any sense at all. So what makes a good KPI? So the first part is that it's manageable. You can do something about it. So whatever you are doing, just make it manageable. So that's the first and probably the most important part of this, let's say, part of the lecture. It has an own source because you can generate or let's say report on revenue from Google Analytics. You can report revenue from your bank. You can report revenue from your, let's say, business tools. But the point is you need to define one single source where there's going to be the let's say the whole truth about it. Because if not, then in meetings, it's not going to be a question of if the number is good or bad, but the point is going to be if you are going to have multiple sources for the same number, and then you're going to argue which one is the correct one. And then you're probably going to lose time defining something which is completely irrelevant for this part. So just define it in the early stages so everyone is in line. Then the other part, the KPI needs to have some kind of a target. So if you have a target that you need to sell or charter, let's say at least 10 boats per month, that's just fine. Just stick to it, and everyone needs to know about this target, especially the agencies or the partners that you work with, because it's not the case that you need to argue this target at the end of the month. It's the point that you need to argue the target, let's say, in the first or the second week in the month, because that's the point where you can do something about it, because if you wait for the end of the month, then it's too late. Then you could probably just learn from your own mistakes, which is also fine. But there are points in the cooperation, let's say, between the agency or if you have an in-house team, that these kinds of unrealistic targets and targets which are probably not going to be met during the month should be communicated early on. So this is something that needs to be communicated inside the organization, meaning that, let's say, high expectation targets and the emphasis on communicating the target, the budget state of the target needs to be, let's say, daily exercise, meaning 5 to 10 minutes of time which you spend on communicating what's happening with your, let's say, main KPIs. And the other part, let's say the last item on the list is that all of the KPIs needs to be segmented, because you can have sales, you can have total sales or whatever in your business, but the point is you need to know which part of the business generates the most of the revenue, or which product categories, which geographic region, and so on. So the segmentation is probably the most important part when working with analytics, because with segmentation you can understand what the issue or what the opportunity is. If you don't do segmentation, if you just report on, let's say, overall success, then it's probably going to be a problem and you are going to learn a lot slower than probably your competition or other industries. Now, when we talk with segmentation, it doesn't have to be complex. In this case, this part of the segmentation is probably the most obvious one when you're working with digital marketing and digital analytics. So this part is the segmentation, which is the basis for this segmentation is traffic acquisition. Meaning whatever you do, let's say either you pay for your ads or I don't know, buy traffic for any kind of referral, affiliate, social network and similar. This is your, let's say, it's like a health check picture when you see what kind of in what kind of a situation you are currently in. Because most of the projects, when they are deep inside, let's say, digital market, they need to be aware what the possibility is to communicate their message and their offer to the market. So in this case, we have four main areas. These four main areas are basically the type of traffic, the type of traffic which you generate on the site. So the first part is this paid media. So the paid media is the simplest one. So when you start a project, probably 90% of all of your traffic acquisition, meaning users that come to your site or let's say to the app, are generated via paid media. So you pay, you get traffic, and you hope for the best. So that's basically what paid media is. The most common examples are, let's say, Google CPC, Facebook paid, or any kind of, let's say, direct pay, a link from, I don't know, a partner site, aggregator sites, or things like that. But in this case, the main issue with paid media is basically that when you have the money, the traffic is going to come to your site, but once the pipe is closed, then it's basically no traffic at all. So this is not a long-term investment. It's usually highly prevalent in cases when there is high competition, charter, let's say there is high competition, especially in countries like Germany or any European Union country, basically. And the click prices and everything else are quite high, quite inflated by the number of companies that bid on the, let's say, same keyword, same audience, and so on. So this kind of a thing is definitely necessary, so the paid media, but it's also something that you need to consider that there are other ways to acquire traffic and to generate basically users coming to your site and generating interest in your product or service. So in this case, this is definitely the own media part. The own media is what you own. It can be either on your platform, meaning your site, your app, your something, your blog, your catalog of boats, but this is basically you control it and you generate traffic with it. Now the usual traffic source for the own part is the let's say organic traffic. It can be either via social or it can be either from Google, but the point is this is something that you need to grow. Because in cases of high saturation of, let's say, competition or high demand and everything else, then you need to spot which keywords, which type of content is driving users to your site and then subsequently converting to a paid customer. And in this case, this is a long-term investment. It cannot be perceived in a way that you do it once. Let's say you do it once per year and then just live with it. It definitely needs to be, let's say, checked from time to time. I don't know, monthly, quarterly, whatever your resources basically are. But the point is, market is changing, so does the need to change your site is always present. It's just a question of what the seasonality for your product is, because people, let's say, look for these kinds of keywords or for this kind of content throughout the year. But there are peaks. There are definitely peaks present. So you need to take care of, let's say, the seasonal content and the off-season content as well. Because the goal of all of these content creation and distribution through these Traffic sources is something that you need to do 12 months, 24/7, always, always. But it doesn't necessarily mean that once you are done with the site, you are done with all of the changes. You need to change the content and adapt to the market situation. So that's always a need. Now we have the two additional parts. Sorry. We have the two additional parts which tell a different story, which is, let's say, this is more for mature projects. So this is not for the early on projects because they are quite extensive in terms of your time spent on the project. Meaning that if you want to do, I don't know, any kind of social media and be present with your page, then you need to have support. And support is, in many cases, quite difficult to do, especially in terms of users expecting an answer as soon as possible. Meaning you can actually generate, let's say, an answer inside an hour, but their expectation of an answer is inside 5 minutes. So you need to be prepared that there are no working hours, that the answers that you basically get to the potential clients, prospects, should be taken quite seriously. Because any kind of a negative experience from the user is most usually shared. So in this case, it's quite dangerous to be present, let's say, on social media, but not take care of the users themselves, so their expectations and everything else. And now we get to this earn part. The earn part is probably the most difficult part. So whenever you have a good experience with your service, you should emphasize on asking the users to give some kind of a recommendation back. Meaning either you can improve your service or they tell about their positive experience with your service. What did they like? Would they like to come back? Why would they do that? And so on. Because that way you are doing this part of making sure that anyone that comes to the site later on has some kind of a real life feedback from, let's say, the end user. In some cases, that can be manufactured, which is not a good case because, let's say, people are already aware that this can happen. So it's really a good practice not to do it. Let's say not to manufacture these kinds of reviews, but basically to ask, to beg people to give you some kind of a feedback, even if it's not fully positive. But the point is, reviews are great to have. Okay, so the segmentation part, and this is the first part that we are going to look inside the analytics interface. We are going to have to look at some additional, let's say, KPIs, which we are going to take through this early segmentation, let's say, traffic acquisition, age, geography, and similar. So the types of, let's say, additional digital marketing KPIs, there are many of them. You can basically choose, cherry pick what you like. But the point is, there is also a segmentation between the KPIs. So there are two main, let's say, categorizations or segmentation that we usually use in our work. And this is the first part, where we differentiate between the soft ones and the hard ones. So the hard ones tell if we are successful or not. So this is their, let's say, goal. The soft ones are just the early, let's say, early part of signals that we get from the market where we can say, okay, this is going in the right direction or not. Or this is, let's say, we have collected some kind of signal from the market which can tell us that there is a significant anomaly happening and we need to do something about it. So let me give you an example of that. Where you look at cost per click, let's say. So the cost per click is basically the amount that you pay to Google or to Facebook once a person clicks on an ad. Once it's a stable, let's say, flat line, everything is fine. You don't really have to do anything about it. It's, let's say, in line with the expectation. You are not doing any kind of changes with the campaigns. But the point is, once it goes, let's say, significantly up or down, let's say increases or decreases by a specific percentage, let's say like 15 to 20, 30%, then you can, let's say, start seeing some early signals from the market. Let's say if the cost per click highly increases in a really narrow time span, this can mean A, that there is significant competition on the site. So let's say everyone was dormant, and a specific, let's say, day or a specific week, the competition started, let's say, their advertising activities. So what does it mean for you? So the first point is you need to make sure that your expectations are now in line with what you had before. So the first part is, yeah, the competition is live as well. We are probably going to sell, but the cost of sales is going to increase definitely, because let's say all of our spending and everything else, our estimations were based on something else. And we need to take care about different things. So the point is that once this, let's say, KPI changes, you need to have a set of specific activities of what you can do to mitigate this kind of a situation. So with CPC, the best way to do is, or let's say the best set of activities which you can do moving onwards. Let's say the first part is check all of the, let's say, keywords which you bid on, and then in this case, make some kind of a hygienic process, meaning remove all of the keywords which are too expensive, which do not convert, which lead to, let's say, increased, I don't know, spending, but without any real, let's say, end result. So that's the first part. The second part, you need to invest more in your, let's say, project in terms of SEO. So making sure that everything is in line with the expectation, with ad relevance, keyword relevance, quality score, ad ranks, and everything else, which you get from the platform. You get some kind of a grade. So if you see that the market prices started to increase, then the, let's say, the subsequent action from your side is to make sure that everything is in line with that. So if your grade is, let's say, 7 from 10, or 7 out of 10, then your, let's say, KPI or your main activity would be how do we increase, let's say, our keyword relevance or site quality to 9 out of 10. This will not revert the cost per click to get back to its original level, but it will definitely help improve your end result by, let's say, reducing the click price by, I don't know, 5%, 10%. These minimal changes in, let's say, these KPIs, in the short term, they're not going to be that relevant. But in the long term, once you start to, let's say, sum up all of these effects, either from site optimization or from ad optimization, then in this case, this will sum up, and then the end result is going to be much, much more effective, hopefully. Because once you start doing it, it's probably going to be that everyone else is going to start doing it. So you need to innovate in a way. So not be present, let's say, just for this single, let's say, channel, or diversify your channel in terms of you don't only use search, you can do display, you can do YouTube, especially now YouTube, where it's this platform is not that highly saturated, especially in some countries, and this is the situation where you can try and be like an early, let's say, player in the game, because there are advertisers within the YouTube network, but the point is that the quality of advertising and the quality of videos and targeting and everything else is quite, I would say, primitive at this level, especially for some industries. So this is still an option for some. Aside from soft, let's say, KPIs, which some of those are quite difficult to understand. Some of are not soft, they are extra soft in terms of, let's say, bounce rates or pages per session, where you try to explain the quality of a session, of, let's say, a visit to your site, by using some kind of a number, which is an average. In this case, pages per session. So let's say if a person, let's say, reads 10 pages on the site, this person is much better than a person who just reads 3 pages on the site. But the point is, this is definitely really soft, because you need to be aware of the whole history of this particular session. Why? Because one user could know your brand, know your site, is, let's say, an existing customer, and in this case, 3 pages is just enough. They get enough information about your product, your service, everything, pricing, they understand the whole process. While the other, let's say, user who, let's say, manages to read 10 pages or 20 pages, it doesn't really matter. He's an early adopter. He probably doesn't know much about the service and doesn't know much about what's he or she getting into once they get to your site. They need to learn the navigation, the process of searching for the product, the whole layout, the design of the site and everything else. So this can be a bit cumbersome for the early entries in the, let's say, service. So once you start evaluating the quality of the site, it definitely cannot just be reliant on, let's say, these kinds of soft metrics, because they don't offer any kind of visibility into success. Now, the hard metrics and the success metrics are basically what drives your business forward. So in this case, it definitely needs to be either revenue, return on ad spend, average order value, transactions, and whatever. So it's always a question of where you are currently at as a business and what you want to drive, let's say, your project to. So this is definitely, there cannot be, let's say, 10 KPIs. When you have 10 KPIs, it's quite difficult to optimize for all of them. So once you, let's say, I want to drive my, let's say, project to push as many transactions as possible because I have, I don't know, a big fleet or something like that in these lines, then your return on ad spend and the cost per acquisitions are not going to follow that same route. You're probably going to have more transactions, but you're probably going to need to spend more, and your return on ad spend and your cost per acquisition are probably going to suffer, meaning that your return on ad spend is going to be quite lower because you are working on that. Because as soon as you start increasing the volume of users, the spending, the transactions and everything else, your return on ad spend is probably going to go down. So their profitability of advertising and everything else is probably going to go down. But the point is, once you get through this period, the next one, if you are able to generate, let's say, good experience with the end user, you manage to create some kind of a relationship with the end user, you manage to get their emails, phone numbers, any kind of a direct communication channel with the user, you can get highly personalized. And in this case, this will not be a measure for the current year, but it's going to be a measure for the next year. Why? Because the large number of users that you have a good relationship with, you can manage to, let's say, contact via non-paid or less paid channel in this way. Okay, so the next one, the next categorization, or let's say the next part of the KPI lecture is the part where we have a separation of leading and lagging KPIs. So the lagging KPIs is what happened, let's say, historically what happened. We have a revenue, we had a revenue, we had this number of transactions and everything else, but this is like a consequence. This is the end result. But then it's always a question of what we need to do in order to amplify, let's say, this end result. And it's usually the answer, especially in digital, of, let's say, either clicks or cost or checkout entries or leads or product views or whatever. But these are the early signals to what you get at the end. Meaning that if you want to, let's say, increase the number of transactions, it's probably going to be that you are going to have to increase the cost. So once you do this part, then the leading part, you need to, let's say, address, if I want to, let's say, increase the number of transactions, I need to increase the cost by a percentage. And then you track basically this spending. I know it sounds a bit, it probably sounds a bit strange, but yeah, the cost and everything else is, let's say, can also be a KPI, because you cannot expect to have a decent number of transactions if the number of users on the site is quite low. So in this case, what usually happens is that we are probably trying to cut the cost as much as possible, and at the same time we are trying to increase the number of transactions. So if we are not talking about cost, let's say we need to talk about, let's say, checkout entries, which means either a person comes to the site and they start searching for the availability of the service or a product. Then in this case, this is already a checkout activity, meaning they already said what they need, when do they need it, how do they need it, and so on. So it's only a question if you have this available at the end at the expected, let's say, price mark. And in this case, what you can do in this case, so it's not the question of cost, but in this case, it's a question of your site optimization. So what are the, let's say, the levers which you can pull on the site which makes people, let's say, search more, be more active on the site, and so on. So this is an additional trick. So it's not only to spend more money on the advertising channels, it's now a question of pushing people from one page, and it's usually a product page or let's say a destination page where you push them to get a quote. So that's the first part. It's either no obligation or no credit card needed or whatever, but the point is just to move them to the next step. So that's your basically the optimization process, that's your KPI, and you also need to, let's say, list few of these activities which can increase the probability of a user clicking on it or using some kind of an interface or entering the checkout process and similar. The next part with KPIs, it's that there is always a danger where we get lost into let's say some numbers that we read inside some articles or industry benchmarks and everything else. So just a quick note, whenever you are doing any kind of optimization in terms of cost optimization, conversion rate optimization, and so on, you are your benchmark. You do not use numbers from competition or from industry averages or whatever, because they can be misleading, because the averages are misleading by definition, basically. So what you want to do is get a starting point. So let's say this is your conversion rate or last year's conversion rate, but from your project. And what you want to do is, let's say, increase your numbers up, top it up. Okay, so once you have all of this measurement plan together, these KPIs, you map them to your business, you know your site and everything else. Now you start creating your measurement plan, or better say, what are you going to measure and how are you going to use all of these data points together. Now, the point with measurement plan, it's quite a boring, let's say, tedious part of work to do at first, but it's quite insightful. Because if you want to do the measurement plan, you need to know your project from the start to the end. Meaning that you need to go through the entire processes which you have on the site, as your users need to do it. So you will have to book it, you will have to register, you will have to do the contact form, you will have to do everything on the site, meaning that you understand what the end user is going through once they want to purchase or get some kind of information from your site. And you need to be aware of all of the errors and the things that can happen or can go wrong within the process. As you remember that previous image with the leaking funnel and everything else, so this is one of the parts where you actually need to spot all of these, let's say, parts of your site, or better say experience, where it's highly expected from the users to get out of the process. So the measurement plan is nothing else but a document which you create and then give to your developers or your in-house staff, which then map it all out to code, let's say. So this is the basis of making sure that everything is tracked, collected, and then at the end reported and used as used for any kind of, let's say, analysis which helps you find the cause, let's say, of a problem or find any kind of opportunity within what's happening on your site. So the first point is to track, let's say, list all of the things that need to be tracked. So there can be many interactions which happen on the site. We will probably have some time to get to an example afterwards, but the point is that let's say, from all of the things that you can track on the site, just don't track the navigation links, basically, because you already have this kind of information present. When I say interaction, interaction can mean many things. It can be play a YouTube video. It can be, I don't know, search for a specific item. It can be book. It can be an e-commerce transaction. It can be send a lead. It can be site search. It can be find a location, learn more. I don't know, anything that the end user can, let's say, perform, which you see as a, let's say, a clear intent to book, let's say, or this person make this subsequent step and they showed us that they are quite interested in what we offer. Now the interactions themselves are not only things that are positive on the site. Let's say a user did something, did something good, or clicked on an image, wanted to learn more about a specific, let's say, boat. But it can also mean that we can track interactions in an, let's say, in a negative context. Once a user gets to a specific point in the booking process, but they then are shown or rendered some kind of an interface error, meaning they didn't enter some specific information correct. They searched for something, but there was zero search results, which is quite disappointing, let's say, on sites. And in these cases, what you need to take care of is also these kinds of, let's say, negative context interactions, because within the experience, you need to minimize all of these things to a really low level. So the risk of losing a client is quite low. So once you said that, you get to this point where you describe basically the interaction. So it's one thing to say, I clicked on something, but I clicked on what specific item, let's say. Was it a button? Was it an image? Was it a video? Was it something? What's the name of the video? What's the name of the product? And so on. So you can get highly granular in this case, meaning that you can describe this kind of an interaction in high detail. And it's always a question of, let's say, when you look at your analytics, it's, let's say, in 90% of cases, it's standardized, meaning that it's standard implementation. You don't have enough information inside. But if you want to enrich all of these pools, you need to be invested in this process in terms of defining all of these things and defining finer details within the process. Then the third point is check for if it's even possible. And most importantly, if it's possible, why do we want to track it? Or how are we going to use it once we have it inside Google Analytics? This is especially valuable if you, let's say, push all of this work to your dev staff. Then in this case, what can happen that it's going to cost you a lot of money. And if you don't have a clear purpose of how you're going to use all of this data and report on it and know things about the projects and everything else, just don't do it, because the cost efficiency of this kind of a project is not, let's say, good in this case, if you cannot answer the question why. So then once you, let's say, did all of this, you get to the list of vendors, meaning that who is going to receive all of this information. And as the, let's say, market grows, competition grows, mediums grow, in terms of places where you can show your ad or your information can be placed. Now we get to a question of there are multiple, let's say, endpoints or platforms where we send all of this information to. Now, in this case, we only talk about Google Analytics, which is, let's say, a holistic overview of what's happening on the site and how we can use all of these things, the quality of the website, quality of advertising, and so on. But the point is there are many more things that you need to take care of if you want your advertising to be more efficient. So let's say the first obvious step is to, let's say, tag and collect all of this data for, let's say, Google Ads, Facebook, any kind of affiliate or partner network which you work with. So in these cases, it's not only sending this information to a one endpoint, but multiple endpoints. And most of these endpoints have different, let's say, schemas or allowed fields where you can send all of this info to. But the more info you send to these platforms, the more smarter they become. Meaning they can learn from the patterns of behaviors of users, of seasonality and everything else. And this platform can utilize all of this data in a way that they make the decisions for you. So I'm going to bid on this specific keyword. I'm going to pay a maximum price of, let's say, 2 to 3 euros for this specific keyword on this specific market in this particular time of day, and so on. So there are multiple things that machines now think of, so we don't have to do it ourselves. That's why they call all of these things smart strategies, smart bidding, smart audiences, and similar. Once we, let's say, list all of these things, we need to take care of this one last item, which is quite tedious, quite boring, and quite in focus now. And this is user privacy and what can we actually collect from the end user and how we can use all of this data from the end user with an expiry date, basically, because nowadays all of this collection and everything else is not endless in terms of time. We need to basically specify we want to collect all of this information from this specific user for this amount of time, and we are going to use it in this specific way. And what's the, let's say, the thing that we probably hate the most is that we always need to ask consent. Once per, let's say, session or once per user should suffice. But in some cases, when you, let's say, get to the site, that's early tracking, basically. So you collect all of these anonymized data, you search for something, you click on something, and so on and so on. But once you get to a more detailed, specific part of the site, let's say the checking process, search process, any kind of a lead generation program, then you get much more detail in terms of sharing personal information, which unfortunately Google Analytics, ads, and Facebook cannot collect. Meaning if you do that now, currently, in any way, and there are accidental ways, deliberate ways to do it, then you are basically breaching the terms of service. And then in this case, most of your accounts can be closed. And you cannot do anything about it, basically. So once you are inside this process, then it's quite difficult and quite dangerous to, let's say, risk all of it because you needed one set of information, which you could probably collect in a different way. Okay, so now that we have all of these things mapped, we'll go through the example in a couple of minutes. So the question here now is, okay, we don't have a lot of time, but in 10 minutes we'll just go through it. Why measure with Google Analytics? So the first and obvious point is you want to know your users, not by name, not by email address, not by anything. But the point is you need to know where the users come from, meaning the geography part, what do they do once they're on the site, and do we need more of them, meaning more of these users. So can we scale, what do we scale about, and so on. So this is the basics of Google Analytics. So it's not the reporting, it's not the technical setup, it's not something, it's basically just a list of questions which you want to, let's say, answer once you start collecting Google Analytics. Because without all of this before, you cannot actually work with Google Analytics, because in terms of what you can measure, how can you use the data, is same for the banking business, for the retail business, for e-commerce and everything else. So the standardized application doesn't work. Just go through this process, and once you're done with it, you can basically move on. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you. No questions. Thanks.